Stop me if you've heard this one. Two people are talking about great horror movies. Person A is a die-hard horror fan, and person B doesn't much care for the genre. I'm guessing person A brought it up. Anyway, person B says that horror movies are stupid, like Friday the 13th Part 8. Did Jason really take Manhattan, or just two boats? But person A says, yeah, but what about all the really smart and or well-made horror movies like The Thing and Jacob's Ladder? And then person B skeptically says, are those even really horror movies? Maybe your experience with this is different. It's entirely possible that your mileage may vary. But me, I hear it all the time. Horror has its share of problems. It is by no means innocent, and it should be held under the same scrutiny as any other genre, no matter how intense its fan base is. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the attempts made by non-horror fans to dispute the very existence of some of the world's greatest horror movies. The method in which non-horror fans often attack the horror genre is to remove the heavyweights from the equation. That means that when in this debate, whenever the horror movie fan references critically acclaimed films that do not fit into the mold of horror that popular consciousness has of it, that being schlock and the stuff of Z-grade video nasty movies, someone tries to shut down this debate right away by saying, those movies aren't really horror movies. It nullifies the conversation, and it can't continue. It's a terrible and oft-used debate tactic, making someone's greatest achievement their greatest weakness. One common example of this is that whenever an intelligent, layered horror film is referenced, someone will say, no, that's psychological thriller. One of the greatest horror movies of all time, Psycho, is probably the easiest film in Alfred Hitchcock's oeuvre to call a horror movie and not only a suspense movie or only a thriller. This also happens with Silence of the Lambs, The Shining, The Babadook, The Innocents, Cube, Eraserhead, so many of the greats. Here's the thing, and if nothing else, I want everyone to take this away from this video. A movie is more than one thing. Silence of the Lambs is a horror movie and a psychological thriller and a crime thriller. A movie being a thriller and a horror movie, these things are not mutually exclusive. In fairness, we can debate ratio, I guess, like, is The Shining 60% horror and 40% psychological thriller? But honestly, when mathematics start entering into the conversation about art, things take kind of an intellectual tailspin. I once heard someone try to explain to me that The Exorcist was a psychological thriller and not a horror movie. Seriously, the movie in which a demon possesses a young girl is only a thriller and not a horror movie. Psychological thriller horrors are actually not the only examples of movies that people try to extract from the genre. Some people prefer to claim Alien is a science fiction movie and not a horror movie when it is actually both. Same with The Fly and a bunch of other examples. These things are just not mutually exclusive. There are tons of other examples, but the point is that these frequent, excessive examples of the greatest horror movies not actually being horror because they share space with other genres or because they're too smart, well, it's a cheap and completely transparent ploy, a weapon in which to discredit the art style of this kind of movie. By forcibly removing all the greatest examples of the genre from the discussion, it handicaps the horror fan, forcing them to show only the merits of their favorite genre through examples that the other side decides are okay. It's dishonest and, frankly, ridiculous. Nothing I am saying is some vain attempt to convince those who dislike horror movies to suddenly give it another chance. If you've experienced a lot of horror movies and they just do nothing for you, then that's it. And that's fine. I have no interest in trying to force feed it to you. After all, I have my own dislikes. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I am saying is that in order for there to be any meaningful, authentic conversation and debate about horror as a genre, both the good and the bad of it, we need to accept basic parameters and definitions, and not try to hobble the conversation by saying all of these things that are horror aren't really horror. To put it in a more simple way, if people are discussing the merits of a thing and can't even agree on what the thing is, then it nullifies the debate and stunts any rational, intelligent discussion. In other words, education and a learned experience cannot occur, and that sucks for everyone. This debate about classifications happens with other kinds of movies sometimes, but horror gets the worst of it, because some people, understandably I admit, have a negative opinion on the genre as a whole. Nobody watches Ben-Hur and says, "This is my favorite epic movie," and then someone immediately interrupts and says, "No, it's not an epic movie, it's a historical drama." Nobody says that, because nobody cares. But horror gets that a lot because of the negative connotations that are attached to the genre. It's not a coincidence that the genre that is sometimes frowned upon is also the one that is most frequently hobbled by trying to steal away its greatest achievements. Full disclosure, I like horror. I mean, that should be obvious. I do. Not as much as I did when I was younger, but there are just too many good examples of the genre to not like it. But before someone rushes to the comments to say that I am biased, listen to what I am saying, not who is saying it, and you might agree that what I am trying to convey has some more objective validity. Discussion and debate, these things are important. It's not just idle talk. Art is meant to be felt, but it is also meant to be discussed so that it can be a shared experience. This whole, is this even a horror movie thing that pops up so much just annihilates the conversation. And it almost always comes from the outside, meaning non-horror fans. Sometimes trying to debate among horror fans a movie's position in the genre itself can be stimulating, I grant that, but the negative tends to outweigh the positive in this particular debate, and it is generally used less as a topic starter and more as a way to end the talk. And there are so many topics to discuss about horror. Like, how does horror reconcile the fact that it both consistently employed female leads for major entries in the genre, sometimes as very strong characters, and at the same time contains many examples of what many would call gratuitous objectification? Side question, even though this aspect has been reduced in the past decade or so, how can horror distance itself from that bad previous reputation? How does horror benefit from and is damaged by the fact that these movies are often made cheaply? Where is the genre heading now that independently financed films that are eventually distributed by big studios like It Follows and The Witch are revolutionizing the so-called art house horror scene? Does the racial minority character still usually die first in the 21st century? And if not, has this been a conscious choice and a conscientious choice on the part of horror filmmakers? All, in my opinion, interesting topics and things I may discuss on future episodes. But the point of all this is that it's hard to have a discussion about horror at all because some rando will pop out of nowhere and say, The Witch isn't a horror movie, it's marketed as a folk tale. Is that even a film genre? Folk tale? Whatever.